In AngularJS directives, when we create isolate scope, we can set up mappings that allow us to pass string values into our scopes using the @ symbol. Values passed in with the @ symbol are literally strings and come with no bindings attached. Angular also performs the conversion automatically, so if you send it an object or a number, it will automatically convert that value into a string. In this video, we will see how to easily pass strings into our Angular directives using the @ symbol syntax. So I have a standard Angular setup with a application module and a controller called main controller, and it's exposed using the controller as syntax in my view right here. And I also have created a directive called test vehicle view already off of my application module. Okay, so now that that's done, the first thing I want to do is create some information in my controller that we can bind to. So I've created two elements. The first one is first item info, which is just some information for a vehicle, which has horsepower, gasoline, doors, and price, for example. And the second item is second item info, which has similar information. So these are JavaScript objects off of the controller. The next thing I want to do is create a object to return that will be my my directive, and I have that now. And I'm going to create an isolated scope off of it. And the scope has 4 elements: a year, a make, a model, and an info. And those are going to be bound using the @ symbol, which means that anything that's sent to them, if you attach, you can either attach a literal or you can send it a value off of your scopes, and Angular will automatically convert it to a string, and there will not be any two-way data binding. But there will be one-way data binding if you attach, for example, info is a complex object here because it's going to be attached to one of these two objects here. If you change elements within your complex object, it will send a string update to your directive using the info. Okay, so the next step is to add to my directive a template, and I'm going to attach to a template called template URL, and I'm also going to attach to a property called restrict and tell it to only allow attributes and elements for this particular directive. Finally, I'm going to create a controller that will log out to the console by taking in the scope, which is the isolate scope, and using dependency injection that's built in Angular. It's going to send the type of the year, make, model, and info, so you can see that all of these variables have been converted to strings. And so our directive is set to go and our application is set to go. So the next step is to start creating the user interface. The first thing is I have a template called vehicle.html that is a standard unordered list with list items that are bound to directive elements or directive properties in the scope called year, make, model. I'm attempting to bind to info.price, which is part of the price here, and also the info itself. Info.price, just keep in mind that that's not going to work because Angular is going to convert info to a string, therefore you can't bind into elements off of an object when you send it using the @ symbol. So now in my user interface, I'm going to create 2 bindings using the directive we created, test vehicle view, and I'm sending it the year, the make, and as you can see, those are hard-coded strings, and info is going to be data bound to first item info and second item info that's in my controller. And then finally, the model is hard-coded as well inside my declarations of my directives. The next section is going to use some HR tags so it's easier to read, and I'm going to bind directly to my first item info and my second item info on my controller so we can see what it looks like and see if it changes. And then the final piece of interface is a input box that is bound to the first item info's price and the second item info's price, just so you can see how that interacts with @. So now when I run this, as you can see, I have two directives that I've created. They correctly bound to the string variables I sent, but notice how the item.price is not rendering, and that's because the item value here has been converted to a string. And I can verify that by looking. Type of year, make, model, and info is all strings. So since it's a string, it's not bindable because only JavaScript objects can be bound to the properties within them. Therefore, the price isn't displaying. Interestingly, I can bind to the string inside my directive, but it's not going to make any changes to anything outside my directive. And I can also bind to the external object itself, and notice how that does send data binding into my directive as a string. But if I were to try to bind to elements on this item, it wouldn't work both ways because it's already been converted to a string and hasn't stayed in as an object. So this is a good way to get data into your directive that you don't have to change and send back to your external scope. And that is a way to protect external scope information and ensure that this particular directive doesn't have the ability to change it.